Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Well, greetings, friends, and welcome to this March 11, 2014 edition of Nightcast. Tonight, friends, the Malaysian Airlines MH370 flight that disappeared from the air traffic map. We have news on that. The moment the missing Malaysian Airlines flight disappeared from the air traffic maps has been captured on a flight tracking website, flighttrader24.com. It shows and records satellite and transponder information to chart the flight paths of commercial airliners. BBC Transport correspondent Richard Westcott explains that despite the tracking information, the exact location of where the plane came down, if it came down, is still not known.
It's somewhat chilling, but this is the tracked path of Flight 370 up until the moment it seemingly vanishes over the sea. Now, I want to stress this doesn't necessarily show where the aircraft came down. If it did, they should have found parts of it by now. There could be other explanations. It may have just dropped below 30,000 feet for some reason. This website doesn't cover that area below 30,000 feet. Or it could mean the aircraft's transponders were switched off or failed. The transponder is a device that keeps pinging out details of the flight to the ground, normally via satellites. You'd never switch off your transponders on purpose because, for one thing, they help you avoid other aircraft. So, the airliner may have come down in a completely different place. In fact, the Malaysian military may have tracked the airliner to the other side of the country through its own radar system. Frankly, that deepens the mystery. If there was a problem that forced them to divert, why didn't the crew radio in a mayday? They should have had plenty of time.
And friends, the stolen passport man was looking for freedom, according to this report by Jonathan Lighthead.
Dozens of planes and maps, but no wreckage. They've been scanning these seas for 4 days. Now they're being forced to consider an extraordinary possibility. Military radar records show the airliner may have turned back, perhaps for hundreds of miles, without being detected.
Clearly this is still a mystery, which is very disturbing, and until we actually can find out sort of where that aircraft is, we might have an opportunity to do some of the forensic analysis that will lead us in the right direction.
At this point, you're not ruling out that it could be
some
sort of terror?
No, not at all.
One mystery, though, has been solved. The identities of the two men travelling on stolen passports, both of them Iranians, have been disclosed and any links to terrorism dismissed.
Yeah, we were in the school together.
Mohammed is a young Iranian living in Kuala Lumpur. He's asked to keep his identity hidden. The two men, one an old school friend, came to stay, he said, the night before they left. They'd flown from Iran and were heading to Europe to seek asylum. He helped them to print out their tickets.
We went together to the print shop and we print the ticket. After that, I see the ticket and I said, like, this is not your name. And then he said, like, yeah, I have another passport. After that, I don't want to continue the story. I said, okay.
So is there any possibility in his mind that his friend, Puria, could have had anything to do with the plane's disappearance?
It's like they were same as my age. Like, I know about Puria. And the other guy, he was so nice, he was so quiet. Puria, he cannot even kill one animal. He was looking for freedom. He was looking for better life. He wanted to, like, live in freedom.
So all those fears that the stolen passports had perhaps been used by terrorists to board the ill-fated airliner have ended here in an ordinary Kuala Lumpur suburb, and a simple story of young men from a troubled country in search of something better.
Instead, they and 237 other people have vanished, along with one of the biggest and safest aircraft in the skies. Jonathan Head, BBC News, Kuala Lumpur.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan Head. And friends, in another story related, before we go to another story related to aircraft and an air defense base, one of the stories related to this missing aircraft report says that the Iranian men were wanting to go to Frankfurt, Germany, in Europe. Now that's very interesting to me because Frankfurt, Germany, as many of you know, is now the headquarters base for the European Central Bank, where the euro is administered. Frankfurt, Germany is also the place where many of the, or most of the emperors of the Holy Roman Empire were coronated, held their coronation, where they were crowned by the Pope. Now, not that these Iranian men are going to become part of the, not that they're going to be the new emperor or anything like that, but who knows where this story on this aircraft situation is going to go. And for the sake of those who had friends, relatives on board that flight, we are certainly looking forward to discovering the outcome of that so that those people can have a certain peace of mind over this incident. Now, in this next story involving the air defense base, the Ukrainian air defense base on the border with Russia, the tensions mount there as the Russians take over this Ukrainian air base.
This is quite a curious situation. I'm standing more or less in front of an air defense base belonging to the Ukrainian forces. We're standing a little bit away from it so as not to upset the Russian troops who've taken it over too much. They've actually been fairly relaxed, but we managed to get a call through to the commanding officer, I think a colonel, who came out to speak to us, a Ukrainian officer, very, very nervous indeed. It must have taken him some courage to walk out, in fact, and walk past the Russian soldiers and speak to us. He wouldn't be interviewed on camera. He wouldn't even be interviewed on a tape recorder. He didn't even give us his name. All he would say was that things were extremely tense inside. He said his men had their weapons still and had plenty of ammunition, but they were clearly extremely tense and nervous about what might happen. And then quite shortly after he started talking to us, a Russian, probably I think an officer but with no markings, came over very politely and said something to him in a quiet voice, and he turned and went away. And that was it. He's now back inside. The tension is palpable, but we can't see any of it from the outside here.
Thank you, John. That was the BBC's John Simpson reporting on the extremely tense atmosphere at the Ukrainian air defense base, now under Russian control. The base was taken over yesterday, on Monday. The Ukrainian commander is still on site, but it's not known how many troops are with him. More tense situation elsewhere in the Ukraine. Boxer Vitali Klitschko was pelted with eggs. He's the former weight champion boxer, now a prominent Ukrainian politician, and he was pelted with eggs by pro-Russian protesters during a demonstration in eastern Ukraine yesterday. Klitschko was addressing a large crowd in the center of Kharkiv when pro-Russian demonstrators on the edge of the square began to throw eggs.
Прошу каждого из вас, не поддавайтесь на провокацию. Я сейчас подойду к вам, ребята. Не поддавайтесь на провокацию.
Но у меня есть поручение. Вчера здесь, на этом месте, более чем...
Гайте, и ни в коем случае Мы должны отталкиваться.
And friends, there have been protests in Simferopol. The crisis in Ukraine remains tense on the ground in Crimea as the referendum over its future draws closer. In this report, the BBC's James Reynolds takes a look at what it's like for pro-Ukraine protesters in the Crimean capital Simferopol.
These are pro-Ukraine demonstrators, and they've gathered here in Simferopol to show their opposition to the referendum. A lot of people who've gathered here say that they won't be voting in the referendum. They say that there's no choice for them. I just want to show you one of the pictures they've got. You'll recognize this man, Vladimir Putin. It says, Putin occupier. And look, here's a picture of the deposed President Yanukovych, reward freedom of Ukraine. Several hundred people have gathered here, and I want to show you the atmosphere just on the edges of the protest, because you'll notice that traffic's going on. The number 11 trolley bus sometimes stops around here. People get on and off, and no one really looks at the protesters. They're not being harassed, but no one's coming to join them either. And these policemen here are part of, I'd say, about a dozen or so officers just standing on the edges of the protest. People here will either be staying at home or will be counter-protesting during the day of the referendum.
Okay, friends. Oh, it looks like, I'm sorry, I forgot to push the button to bring that story full screen for you there. And that was Simferopol, where that was occurring. Now, in this next story, the BBC's Steve Rosenberg reports from the city of Lugansk. From the city of Lugansk, that's in eastern Ukraine, which is on the Russian doorstep. It has seen power change hands several times since the crisis began. In the latest development, the Kiev-appointed governor was forced to resign, and a people's governor was installed instead, working from a tent in the city square.
Ukraine's industrial heartland is on Russia's doorstep. The border is just a few minutes' drive from here. After the Crimea, there's concern that this region could be the next flashpoint. On Sunday, a pro-Moscow crowd seized the regional administration building in Lugansk. Up went the Russian flag. They claimed the rights of Russian speakers were under threat. The local governor, who'd been appointed by Kiev, was forced to resign. The protesters did eventually leave the building and appointed a people's governor, gas pipe engineer Alexander Kharitonov. He and his supporters have set up shop in a tent on the square. What happened in Kiev was a fascist coup, he says. He's prepared to ask Vladimir Putin to intervene to protect Russian speakers here. As for the governor who had resigned, well, today he announced he changed his mind and was still in charge. Who is trying to destabilize the situation here? Is Russia playing a role in this? Governor Bolotskih refused to name names. He blamed everything on radicals and extremists. But there are many in eastern Ukraine who are genuinely worried by their country's pro-Western revolution. Like many factories in this region, the Lugansk locomotive plant sells most of its goods to Russia, not to Europe.
Many people in eastern Ukraine say it's all very well talking about integration with Europe and closer ties with the EU. But if that means that Russia will punish us by refusing to buy what we're making at the factories, then that could lead to economic collapse.
Which is why the workers I spoke to here want the West to back off. Tell Obama to keep his nose out, Victor says. We'll decide who to do business with. It's fear of losing their jobs which is fueling suspicion of the West. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Lugansk.
Thank you, Steve. NATO says it will deploy reconnaissance planes over Poland and Romania as part of efforts to monitor the situation in Ukraine. The United Nations Security Council has met for the 5th time in 10 days to discuss the crisis. Britain's ambassador to the UN, Mark Grant, said that a free and fair referendum cannot take place while Crimea is under the illegal control of Russian troops.
The Ukrainian constitution is clear that the Autonomous Republic of Crimea does not have the power to call for this referendum. This referendum has no basis in Ukrainian law and would violate a number of articles in the Ukrainian constitution. In addition to questions of legality and legitimacy, it is equally clear that a free and fair referendum cannot take place while Crimea is under the illegal control of Russian troops and armed militias who are denying access to international monitors. In the light of these concerns, if the referendum goes ahead on the 16th of March, its results must be considered illegal and illegitimate by all nations.
And friends, in this next video clip, this one's you're going to find this very interesting. I think the former, the ousted, at least temporarily ousted, President Viktor Yanukovych has condemned the United States for supporting a bandit regime and says that he will return to Kiev.
As soon as the circumstances allow me, I'm sure it will not be long, I will be back in Kiev. And I say that the elections in Ukraine that were announced to take place on the 25th of May by those who take the power in Ukraine, they are not legitimate and they're not legal. They do not correspond to the Article of 103 of the Ukrainian Constitution. Any authorities in Ukraine that would be formed as a result of these illegal elections, they will be illegal and unlawful. And apart from their law illegitimacy, these elections will be in the circumstances of a total control by the extremists. And so I address to the international community, nobody has a right or should not support bandits and anti-constitutional coup. And by the way, everyone understands, about the government of the United States to give $1 billion to this bandit regime. As far as I understand, the United States law in the United States forbids to support financially the government of any country that is illegal, and a country where the president was overthrown by the coup or any other illegal decisions. So I intend to address the Congress and the Senate and the highest court of the United States with the proposal to give the legal assessment of these actions. You do not have a right, according to your own laws, to give money to bandits.
The ousted President Viktor Yanukovych was speaking at a news conference in Russia where Mr. Yanukovych said the Ukrainian presidential elections that have been announced for May 25, as you heard him say, he said they would be illegal and unlawful. Now, related to the United States, the UN calls for drone deaths accountability.
Drones have become an increasingly common tool of war, a means for targeted killing from the air. But are governments open enough about the innocents who are caught up when their weapons are unleashed? Now a new study has provided details about what's happened in dozens of incidents in which civilians have been injured or killed. A UN Special Rapporteur has investigated 30 strikes in different countries, modelling what happened and how civilians were affected. He believes the idea that only combatants are killed is wrong and that mistakes need to be acknowledged.
Where things go wrong, we regard it as really essential for promoting reconciliation, for promoting reparation, that those who have been responsible take responsibility and make public the results of their own inquiries.
The rapporteur's team have used advanced computer forensics to recreate the strikes in Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, Gaza and Afghanistan and examine evidence about who was killed and how. Last year, he says 45 civilians were killed in 19 confirmed drone strikes in Afghanistan. One of the strikes the rapporteur looked at was in a remote village in Yemen. It killed 3 al-Qaeda militants, but 2 villagers also died. One was a cleric who denounced al-Qaeda. His brother-in-law witnessed the attack.
It was the most frightening sound I've heard in my whole life, with all the wars we've seen in this country between the north and south. It felt like the mountain had fallen on us.
So I want to offer up all these sort of...
Although there have been a few voices of dissent at home, the US has been at the forefront of using drones to go after al-Qaeda, crippling its leadership in Pakistan.
President Obama has justified his increased use of drone strikes, saying they're self-defense against terrorists planning to attack Americans. But he's conceded there needs to be near certainty that civilians won't be killed before any strike takes place.
Drones are a new weapon, and they're here to stay. What the UN rapporteur is calling for is greater debate and legal clarity about how they're used and openness about what the costs really are. Gordon Carrera, BBC News.
Friends, thank you for joining us for this Tuesday night edition of Nightcast on March 11, 2014. That's it for tonight. God willing, and the creek don't rise. We'll be back again tomorrow evening with the current day's news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Until next time, your excuse me, friends. God willing, and my throat holds up. We'll be back again tomorrow night, Wednesday night. Until next time, your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying, so long, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on COGTV.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the COGTV.org video archive.